The Calamity, an event that cast the world that was into fire. Infrastructure broke down, nations collapsed as continents were torn asunder, and the world burned. From the fires, the earthquakes, and the eruptions the world over, the air was filled with dust and ash, darkening skies and cooling the planet. Those that had survived the burning were blighted with crops wilting in the darkness. Faced with a collapsing ecosystem, millions perished. Those that could found shelter clustered amidst the newly emerged geothermal fissures, blessed with a natural source of warmth and fertile soil. From these humble roots, civilization would be reborn, finding in the fissures of their destruction a new source of energy. This discovery transforming the region's most devastated into the centers of a newly emergent global order. At the forefront of such developments was the nascent Pacific Federation, a nation blessed with easy, regular access to geothermal energy and mineral resources. Born of surviving corporate and government institutions, it was imbued with political, economic, and scientific powers that few of their potential rivals could muster. Driven to dominate the geothermal energy trade, the Federation leveraged their power to expand across the Pacific, inducing a number of neighboring nations and peripheral states into their growing sphere of influence. Within 50 years of their founding, they all but controlled the Pacific. From northern Magadan to Oceania in the south, from their core territories to distant Cascadia, the Federation stood triumphant. Their success the envy of their peers, and though some were critical of this Federation, particularly their control of the energy market, most simply kept quiet, not wanting to lose access to this trade or risk the wrath of a Federation scorned. While the Federation projected an image of one federal system, united and harmonious internationally, internally the Federation was an amalgam of systems, divided between a core of federal territories and a periphery of vassalized member states, many of which were drawn in by the promise of vast infrastructure projects and the promise of protection against pirates and other nations. In exchange, all they had to do was grant the Federation control over its geothermal resources and give them the power to collect taxes. Beyond such minute criteria, member states were largely left to their own devices, to their own political systems, and only slowly and mostly consensually federalized into the core of the Federation. Such a process begins with the Federation integrating a member state's infrastructure and social programs, the results of which tend to increase the quality of both, bringing them in line with federal standards and typically uplifting the vassal state's standard of living. This would be followed by the introduction of programs to align political, military, and social norms. Perhaps the most famous being the creation of a local peacekeeper squadron made up of the best native pilots to be held up as exemplars to the public, the best of the Federation and the best of that region welded together. With the final steps of integration overseen by both the region's peacekeeping force, and a fleet of airships to ensure a peaceful transition of power. The success of the Federation proved something of a curse, as their population boomed and their cities grew into vast urban jungles of concrete and metal that stretched on for miles, consuming more and more resources. To provide for its people, their foreign policy shifted away from gradual incorporation to a more imperial mindset, pressuring their member states for ever more resources, seeing in any resistance a potential threat to the Federation's future. Such a threat was encompassed by Oceania, who declared its intent to break from the Federation, claiming an inability to keep pace with the increasing demand on their resources, and supported by an influx of mercenaries. Such a development could not be tolerated. It was deemed a threat to the stability and security of the Pacific, and forces were mobilized across the Federation to occupy this rebellious territory. Despite significant resistance, Federal forces quickly gained the upper hand. And with the tide turning, many of Oceania's mercenary allies betrayed one another, trading their service to the highest bidder, and in their bloody wake, Oceania was restored to the Federation. The mercenary betrayal in the Oceania conflict saw an upswing in public disapproval of such forces, and with it, the Federation sought to limit their use of any such organization within federal territory or within their periphery. They were aided in such efforts by the success demonstrated by their own armed forces. With their track record of having never lost a conflict, there grew a sense of invincibility, a sense that the Federation itself was untouchable. Perhaps this trend was best exemplified by the tendency to maintain their aircraft in parade colors, flaunting their power in the face of their opponents. And with this federal dominance revealed, periphery states were quick to align with greater powers, each becoming a point of contention in the developing Cold War that would see the Federation extend its influence across North America and reaching as far afield as the Creole Republic. Despite this growth, all was not well within the Federation. The pressure for expansion, the demand for more resources, the growing Cold War, and a more militant focus on the periphery all bred resentment towards federal authority, particularly within Cascadia, which eventually led to some questioning whether or not the region should seek its own independence. The Federation, unwilling to accept such a threat to its hegemony, and incapable of affording the loss of resources that such a move would entail, moved to accelerate the integration of Cascadia. This effort contributing to a fragmentation of Cascadian forces between those loyal to the Federation and those now supporting an independent state. To further cement their control, federal forces imposed a nationwide communication blackout, grounding or diverting civilian aircraft away from Cascadia and sending their forces to secure positions throughout the region. All the while presenting an image of harmony to the world at large, with nothing more than minor riots occurring within Presidia. Their armed forces proved overwhelming to the rebels, pushing them to the brink of collapse and were it not for the arrival of outside mercenary forces, the war might well have ended then. Yet these mercenaries proved far more effective than anyone could have anticipated. Federal forces were slowly pushed onto the back foot and were gradually forced to give ground. Unable to contain the conflict, any semblance of control was soon lost as their combat forces were depleted, their communications network destroyed, and fighting spilled over into their own territories. Together, such images shattered any illusions of their forces' invincibility, a point soon reinforced by the destruction of their aerial fleet in Sawaiki. With pressure mounting, their supply lines all but broken, and their forces in disarray, a desperate plan was put into action. As rebel forces moved against the Federation's regional headquarters in Prospero, and the final battles waged in Magadan, Cordium-tipped cruise missiles were launched to instill fear and terror into the hearts of this rebellion, and when they struck, their detonations set off a cascade of explosions beneath the surface of the Earth. The geothermal vents burst with a fire and fury not seen since the Calamity. The destruction vented across the ring of fire smothered the conflict, as both sides were forced to seek shelter. All the while, the brutality of this attack saw the Federation vilified the world over, with several powers moving to seize federal assets within their own territories. When the war did resume, federal forces remained scattered, unprepared for the blitzkrieg of Cascadian forces. Left with little coordination and limited supplies, they proved incapable of halting the momentum of the war, and were quickly pushed back to Presidia, the capital of Cascadia. There they were besieged by land, sea, and air. These final holdouts fought a fanatic defense, but it proved too little too late, as their air fleet crashed to Earth and their naval vessels settled beneath the waves. A ceasefire was declared, whereby federal troops were to be evacuated from Cascadia. And there, for a moment, there was hope that peace could be achieved. All of which was dashed mere moments later, when a fighter bearing the markings of Cascadia's own peacekeepers fired on both sides. Such was the destruction they wrought that Presidia burned, its great skyscrapers crumbling to the earth below. The actions of this pilot served to further vilify the Federation in the eyes of the world, with many questioning whether this pilot acted alone. Such questions saw several prospective member states withdraw their applications. Even amongst the members of the Federation, some moved to distance themselves from the core territories. With the bulk of its combat forces destroyed, its international rivals investigating the use of cordium as a weapon, and the periphery rallying to Cascadia, the Federation has been left, for perhaps the first time since its inception, vulnerable.